The Galactic Coalition's Central Detection Array had never failed in its 3,000 years of operation. Until today. High Administrator Vextal stood before the massive holographic display, her crystalline form pulsing with barely contained agitation. The ship had simply appeared. No hyperspace signature. No quantum wake. No distortion field. One moment empty space, the next a vessel of unfamiliar design hovering less than 10,000 kilometers from the Coalition's most secure facility. Impossible, muttered Chief Analyst Zarkin, his tentacles writhing as he pored over the sensor data. Even if they had technology we've never encountered, there should be something. Energy signatures, gravitational disturbance, heat displacement. You can't move through space without leaving traces. Evidently, Vextal responded dryly, you can. The vessel, if it could be called that, defied conventional design principles. Where Coalition ships featured sweeping curves and elegant geometries, this craft seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Its hull appeared to shift and ripple, making it difficult to focus on any single point. The few readings they could gather suggested it was simultaneously massive and nearly massless. "They're hailing us," announced Communications Director Ryleth. "Simple electromagnetic transmission. Practically primitive." Vextal's crystalline surface flickered with amusement. Primitive. Yes, like a Stone Age hunter carrying a quantum rifle. Put them through. The holographic display shifted, and Vextal found herself face to face with a being she presumed to be human. The creature appeared remarkably ordinary, bipedal, symmetrical, clothed in what appeared to be a simple dark uniform. Yet something about its eyes made her outer layers shiver. "Greetings, High Administrator," the human said, speaking perfect Coalition standard. "I am Captain Sarah Chen of the Earth vessel Whisper. We apologize for any alarm our arrival may have caused." Alarm. Vextal managed to keep her tone level. That's an interesting way to describe appearing undetected inside our most secure perimeter. A perimeter, I might add, that's protected by technology we've spent millennia perfecting. Captain Chen's expression remained neutral, but Vextal could have sworn she saw a flicker of something. Amusement. Pity? Crossed those alien features. "Yes, about that," Chen replied. "We've been meaning to talk to you about your perimeter. There are some concerning vulnerabilities we've noticed. Among other things." The room fell silent. Zarkin's tentacles went completely still. Ryleth's communication arrays turned a pale shade of shock white. Vulnerabilities. Vextal's crystalline form pulsed with dangerous intensity. "You've been observing us for approximately 47 of your standard years," Chen confirmed. "This facility alone has been penetrated by 17 different human vessels during that time. The Whisper is simply the first one we've allowed you to detect." The implications hit Vextal like a gravitational wave. If they were telling the truth, why reveal yourselves now? Chen's expression finally changed, revealing something that looked unsettlingly like concern. "Because in those 47 years, we've observed something else. Something that makes your perimeter vulnerabilities look like a minor technical issue. We've detected anomalies in the dark space between your worlds. Patterns that shouldn't exist. And they're growing." Holograms sprang to life around Chen, displaying data that made Zarkin's tentacles curl in disbelief. "These readings, they're impossible. We would have detected." "No," Chen interrupted gently. "You wouldn't have. Your detection systems are based on principles that work perfectly well for known phenomena. But you've been looking for the wrong things in the wrong ways for a very long time. And you've been looking the right way." Vextal couldn't keep the skepticism from her voice. "We had to," Chen replied. "Earth exists in a particularly dark region of space. We learned early that conventional detection methods were worse than useless. They actually blind you to certain phenomena. So we developed alternatives, different ways of looking, different ways of moving, different ways of thinking. And what exactly have you seen with these alternative methods?" Chen's expression grew grave. "Something old, something that's been sleeping in the spaces between your worlds, and it's beginning to wake up. New holograms appeared, showing patterns that seemed to hurt Vextel's sensory organs just by looking at them. Data streams that appeared to flow backwards through time. Energy signatures that existed in negative space. This is why we're revealing ourselves now, Chen continued. Humanity has been watching, protecting when needed, staying hidden because we weren't sure how you'd react to our unconventional approaches. But what's coming requires more than silent guardians. It requires cooperation. And if we refuse this cooperation, Vextal asked, though she already suspected the answer, then we'll continue protecting you as best we can, Chen replied simply. As we have been. But I don't think you'll refuse. Because once you understand what we've detected, once you see what we've seen. She paused, and this time there was no mistaking the emotion in her eyes. You'll understand why we've spent nearly 50 years preparing for this moment. As if to emphasize her point, new readings suddenly appeared on the Coalition sensors. Hundreds of them. Thousands. Human ships decloaking throughout Coalition space, each one having maintained perfect stealth for years or decades. Vextel felt her crystalline form resonate with a mixture of fear, humiliation, and reluctant admiration. They had never been alone, never been as safe, or as advanced, as they'd thought. And now these humans, these silent guardians, were finally speaking up. Because something worse than humans was hiding in the dark. The Coalition Security Council chamber hadn't been this crowded in centuries. Representatives from 17 species filled the tiered seating, their varied forms creating a living tapestry of bioluminescence, crystalline structures, and morphing geometries. At the center of it all, a human stood perfectly still. Dr. Maya Patel, Earth's chief quantum physicist, waited as the assembled council processed the data she'd just presented. The silence was broken only by the soft humming of crystalline beings vibrating in distress. Let us be absolutely clear, First Speaker Ixalan finally said, their luminous form pulsing with each word. You're claiming that human vessels have been stationed at every major coalition world, monitoring our activities for decades. Not quite, Maya replied, her calm voice belying the gravity of her words. We've been monitoring the spaces between your worlds. Your planets themselves were never our primary concern. The holographic display behind her shifted, showing a map of coalition space unlike anything they'd seen before. Where their star charts showed neat lines of trade routes and planetary bodies, this map revealed something else. Shadows and currents in supposedly empty space, patterns that seemed to writhe and twist when viewed directly. What you're seeing, Maya continued, is what we call the quantum undertow. Spaces where reality itself grows thin, where the boundaries between dimensions become permeable. Impossible, declared Technical Overseer Venra, their mechanical appendages clicking in agitation. We've mapped every significant spatial anomaly in coalition space. Our quantum detection arrays are based on fundamentally flawed assumptions, Maya interrupted gently. You built incredible technologies, but you built them to detect what you expected to find. We had to learn to look for the unexpected. She gestured, and the display zoomed in on a seemingly empty region of space. As the view magnified, complex patterns emerged, swirling eddies of probability, tears in the fabric of space-time that appeared and vanished like cosmic heartbeats. Earth exists in what you would call a dead zone, a region of space your sensors register as empty. We learned early that this emptiness was an illusion. There were things moving through our system, things that existed just slightly out of phase with conventional reality. We had to develop new ways of thinking, new ways of seeing, just to survive. The display shifted again, showing the gradual evolution of human sensor technology. Where coalition systems tried to pierce the darkness with concentrated energy, human sensors worked more like nets, catching the ripples of disturbance in the quantum foam of space itself. Your civilizations evolved in regions of space that were, relatively speaking, stable, safe. You never had to look deeper. We did. And what we found. Maya paused, her expression growing grave. What we found suggested that the stable regions weren't natural. They were engineered, maintained, protected. A murmur ran through the council chamber. First Speaker Ixalan's luminescence flickered with concern. Protected from what? We're still not entirely sure, Maya admitted, but we know they're ancient, vast, and until recently, dormant. We call them the deep dwellers, entities that exist primarily in the quantum undertow, surfacing only to feed. The display showed historical data, seemingly natural disasters on distant worlds, unexplained disappearances of early coalition expeditions, strange gravitational anomalies that had been dismissed as instrument errors, all connected by patterns that only became visible when viewed through humanity's unique lens. This is why we revealed ourselves, Maya continued. For decades, our ships have been positioned not just to observe, but to maintain quantum barriers at critical points throughout coalition space. We've been reinforcing the walls of reality itself, preventing incursions. But the deep dwellers are stirring. The barriers are beginning to fail, and we can no longer maintain them alone. Why should we believe any of this? Venra demanded. You appear from nowhere, with impossible technology, claiming to be our secret protectors. A new voice cut through the chamber. Show them, Dr. Patel. Captain Chen had appeared silently at the chamber's entrance. Maya nodded, and the display changed one final time. Now it showed real-time feeds from human vessels throughout coalition space, each maintaining its position at a quantum weakness point. As the Council watched, several ships' quantum barriers flickered, and in those brief moments, something showed through. Shapes that shouldn't exist, geometries that hurt to look at, movement in dimensions that had no names. The stable regions of space you called home. Maya said softly, they're not stable because that's their natural state. They're stable because something made them that way. Something that built walls to keep the deep dwellers out. Those walls are failing. And unless humanity and the coalition work together, what comes through won't care about our political differences. The chamber erupted in overlapping voices, questions, and demands. But First Speaker Ixalan raised their appendages for silence, their glow now a deep, thoughtful purple. You've been protecting us, they said, without any guarantee we would ever know or thank you for it. Why? Maya's answer was simple. Because that's what humanity does. We find threats, we face them, and we protect others from them. Not for glory, not for thanks, but because someone has to stand in the dark places and hold the line. As if to emphasize her point, alarms suddenly blared throughout the chamber. On the display, one of the quantum barriers was beginning to fail. The time for discussion was over. The deep dwellers were surfacing. The quantum barrier breach occurred in Sector 7, a supposedly empty region of space between the Coalition's outer colonies. As alarms echoed through Coalition Command, the massive holographic display showed something that shouldn't exist, reality itself peeling open like old paint. All vessels, maintain formation. Captain Chen's voice cut through the chaos. Quantum anchors at maximum. Do not, I repeat, do not engage directly. The assembled coalition leaders watched in stunned silence as human ships moved with impossible precision. Where coalition vessels would have charged in with weapons blazing, the human fleet formed complex geometric patterns around the breach, their quantum drives pulsing in perfect synchronization. They're singing, whispered Science Director Krull, their neural filaments twisting in fascination. The harmonics of the human ship's quantum drives created patterns in space-time itself, weaving a web of reality-enforcing energy around the breach. But it wasn't enough. Something emerged from the tear, something that existed in more dimensions than coalition sensors could process. The few instruments that didn't immediately overload showed it as a writhing mass of probability curves, a thing that was simultaneously there and not there, its very existence an affront to conventional physics. First deep dweller breach confirmed, Dr. Patil announced, her voice steady despite the horror unfolding before them. Phase 2 protocols in effect. The human ship's formation shifted, and new devices emerged from their hulls. Technologies that made even the most advanced coalition scientists stare in confusion. They weren't weapons in any conventional sense. Instead, they appeared to be creating localized pockets of altered physics, spaces where the normal rules of reality were politely but firmly enforced. Remarkable, breathed technical overseer Venra, their earlier skepticism forgotten. They're not trying to destroy it. They're trying to make it conform to our universe's laws. You can't destroy a deep dweller, Maya explained, her eyes fixed on the display. At least, not in any way that matters. They exist across too many dimensions. Destroy them here, they simply slip sideways and return. But you can convince them that this reality is too solid for their comfort. The deep dweller writhed as the human ships tightened their reality-enforcing field. Where it touched the field, its impossible geometries were forced to resolve into shapes that could exist in normal space. The effect seemed to cause it pain, if such a concept could apply to such a being. But then it did something unexpected. It adapted. All ships, full power to quantum anchors. Chen's voice carried an edge of urgency now. It's trying to pull our reality into its space instead of conforming to ours. The coalition leaders watched in horror as space itself began to warp. The deep dweller was learning, using the very forces meant to contain it to instead reshape its environment. Several human ships' quantum anchors began to overload, their reality-enforcing fields flickering. "This is beyond anything we've encountered," Maya said, her calm finally cracking. "It's more advanced than our models predicted. We need to stop thinking like humans," Chen interrupted. Her hologram turned to the coalition leaders. "Your ships, they use different principles than ours. Different ways of interacting with space. We need them. Now." First speaker Ixalan's crystalline form pulsed with decision. "All coalition vessels in range, move to support the human fleet. Follow their coordination protocols." Coalition ships began arriving, their more conventional drives creating different ripples in space-time. The deep dweller reacted to these new forces, its adaptation momentarily disrupted by the introduction of unfamiliar physics. "That's it," Chen breathed. "It can't adapt to everything at once. Dr. Patel, reconfigure the quantum anchors to work in concert with coalition drive signatures." What followed was unlike anything in known space combat doctrine. Human ships, with their reality-enforcing fields and quantum manipulation, working in perfect coordination with coalition vessels, more conventional but equally vital technologies. Each fleet compensated for the other's weaknesses, creating a symphony of overlapping forces that the deep dweller couldn't predict or counter. Slowly, inexorably, the entity was pushed back toward the breach. As it retreated, human quantum anchors sealed the tear in reality behind it, not merely closing the breach, but reinforcing the underlying fabric of space-time. When it was over, Coalition Command fell silent. The display showed normal space again, though the sensors that could detect such things reported that this region would never be quite the same. "Well done," Chen said simply, "but this was just the first. And now they know we can work together." "How many more?" Ixalan asked. Maya's response was grim. "We've detected quantum disturbances increasing throughout coalition space. This wasn't an isolated incident. It was a test. The deep dwellers are probing our defenses, learning our capabilities. And next time." She didn't need to finish the thought. Everyone who had witnessed the battle understood. The entity had adapted to their tactics in minutes. Next time, it would begin with that knowledge. "Then we'll need to adapt faster," Chen said. "Humanity has been preparing for this war for decades, but we're fighting beings that don't just break the rules of physics. They never learned them in the first place. We'll need everything both our civilizations have. Every different approach, every unique perspective." As if to emphasize her point, dozens of new quantum disturbances began appearing on the long-range sensors. The deep dwellers weren't just coming. They were coming together. Coalition's Central Command had been transformed. Where once pristine holographic displays showed neat formations of ships and clear battle lines, now the room pulsed with overlapping fields of data that seemed to defy conventional display technology. Human and coalition scientists worked side by side, their different approaches to reality creating something entirely new. "Multiple breaches detected," announced the integrated sensor network, its voice a blend of human AI and coalition quantum consciousness. "Deep dweller emergence patterns show increasing complexity." Dr. Maya Patel stood at the central platform, her hands moving through fields of probability data like a conductor before an orchestra. Around her, coalition scientists watched in fascination as she manipulated quantum strings they had never known existed. "They're not just adapting anymore," she said, her eyes tracking patterns invisible to most others. "They're evolving, creating new ways to interact with our reality." Captain Chen's hologram appeared beside her, displaying real-time data from the front lines. "The quantum barriers are holding, but they're finding new ways through. Ways we never anticipated." The main display showed the current state of the conflict. Hundreds of human ships maintained their positions at key quantum weak points throughout coalition space, their reality-enforcing fields glowing with strain. Coalition vessels moved in complex patterns between them, their more conventional technologies creating a counterpoint to the humans' quantum manipulation. But the deep dwellers had learned from their first encounter. Instead of trying to force their way through the barriers, they were now doing something far more insidious. They were changing the underlying structure of space itself. "Fascinating," murmured technical overseer Venra, their mechanical appendages whirring as they analyzed the data. "They're not breaking through the walls of reality. They're changing the definition of what walls are." "Exactly," Maya confirmed. "And that's why we need to show them our true capabilities." She turned to Captain Chen. "It's time for Protocol Omega." Chen's hologram nodded grimly. "All ships, initiate Omega sequences. Show them what we've been hiding." The assembled coalition leaders watched in awe as human vessels began to transform. What had appeared to be conventional hulls shifted and flowed, revealing layers of technology that had been carefully concealed. Quantum drives that didn't just manipulate reality, but actively rewrote it. Sensors that didn't just detect other dimensions but reached into them. All this time, First Speaker Ixalan breathed, their crystalline form pulsing with understanding. "Your ships weren't just advanced. They were incomplete, waiting. We knew the deep dwellers would learn from whatever we showed them," Chen explained. "So we showed them what we wanted them to see. Let them think they had adapted to our capabilities. But humanity hasn't survived by showing all our cards at once." The transformed human ships began moving in new ways, their movements describing geometries that shouldn't have been possible. They weren't just enforcing reality anymore. They were suggesting new versions of it, creating spaces where the deep dwellers' own fluid approach to physics worked against them. "Coalition vessels," Maya called out. "Maintain your current operations. What you're doing is vital. The deep dwellers have learned to counter our individual approaches, but they've never seen them working in true harmony." The battlefield became a dance of impossible complexity. Human ships phased between dimensions, their true forms finally revealed as devices that existed partially outside conventional spacetime. Coalition vessels provided the anchor points of familiar physics, creating a framework that the humans could build upon. And through it all, the deep dwellers found themselves caught in a web of overlapping realities. Each time they adapted to one approach, another would shift and change, keeping them off balance. "It's working," Chen announced, though her voice held no triumph. "They're retreating from the quantum barriers. But they're learning this too," Maya finished. "Every second we fight them, they understand more about how our universe works and how to unmake it." A new alert sounded, different from the others, carrying harmonics that seemed to vibrate through multiple dimensions. "What is that?" Ixalan demanded. Maya's expression was grim. "They're calling for reinforcements. Not just more of their kind, but something else. Something older. Something that remembers when the walls between realities were first built." The assembled leaders watched as new patterns appeared in the quantum foam of space, patterns that made the deep dwellers look simple by comparison. Whatever was coming, it had been waiting, watching, learning, and humanity's hidden capabilities might not be enough to stop it. The entity that emerged from deep quantum space defied description in any known language. Where the deep dwellers twisted reality, this being seemed to exist outside of it entirely, observing their universe, as one might view a painting, with detached interest and the ability to simply reach in and rearrange things at will. Ancient One detected, the integrated sensor network announced, its voice carrying harmonics of genuine awe. Quantum structure destabilizing across all observed dimensions. In Coalition Command, Maya and Chen shared a look that spoke volumes. This was what humanity had been preparing for all along. Not just the deep dwellers, but their masters. Now we know why the barriers were built, Maya said softly. Not to protect space from the deep dwellers. To protect it from that. The Ancient One's presence alone began unraveling the quantum barriers humanity had maintained for decades. Reality rippled around it like tissue paper in a storm. Both human and coalition ships found their most advanced technologies reduced to little more than interesting suggestions in its presence. All vessels, fall back to secondary positions, Chen ordered, her voice steady despite the situation. Initiate final protocol. First speaker Ixalan's crystalline form vibrated with alarm. Fall back. That thing will unmake everything in its path. No, Maya corrected, her hands dancing through probability fields with renewed purpose. It won't, because we're going to show it something it's never seen before, something even older than it is. The human fleet began a maneuver that seemed like retreat but was anything but. As they pulled back, their ships began resonating in patterns that reached deep into the quantum foam of space itself. Coalition vessels, following their lead, found their conventional drives creating unexpected harmonics with the human frequencies. What we discovered in Earth's dead zone wasn't just about avoiding detection. Maya explained as she coordinated the fleet movements. We found echoes, remnants of the first universe, the one that existed before entities like the Ancient One learned to reach between realities. The Ancient One paused in its advance, sensing something different in the combined fleet's movements, something familiar yet impossible. You see, Chen continued, humanity didn't develop our technology by pushing forward. We developed it by looking back, way back, to when reality wasn't something that could be twisted or reshaped, when it was absolute. Understanding dawned in Ixalan's crystalline patterns. You're not enforcing our reality. We're remembering an older one, Maya confirmed. One where things like the Ancient One couldn't exist, and we're inviting it to remember too. The combined human and coalition fleet now moved in patterns that seemed to draw on something fundamental, not the quantum foam of space, but something beneath it, between it, before it. Their drives resonated with frequencies that didn't manipulate reality but simply stated it, as irrefutable as mathematics itself. The Ancient One recoiled. For the first time in countless eons, it encountered something it couldn't simply reach in and rearrange. The human ships weren't fighting its ability to manipulate reality. They were reminding space itself of how it used to be, of rules so old they weren't even rules, just the way things were. Coalition vessels, Chen called out, maintain your current physics. You represent what is. We'll represent what was. Together, we'll show it what must be. The Ancient One fought back, trying to assert its will over space-time. But everywhere it reached, it found not resistance but remembrance. The combined fleet's movements created a cascade effect, spreading out through quantum space like ripples in the cosmic deep, each wave carrying echoes of original reality. Deep dwellers began retreating en masse, their fluid approach to physics suddenly working against them as space remembered its first principles. The Ancient One found itself caught between what was and what had been, its very nature a contradiction that reality itself was beginning to reject. In Coalition Command, Maya's hands finally stilled. It's done. The quantum ripples will continue spreading. Space is remembering itself. Not just remembering, Chen added. Learning, growing stronger. The barriers won't be needed anymore because reality itself is becoming resilient. As the Ancient One and its deep dwellers retreated to whatever spaces they had come from, Coalition Command erupted in celebrations. But among the cheers and congratulations, First Speaker Ixalan approached the human representatives with a new understanding in their crystalline patterns. You never needed our help to fight them, they said. It wasn't a question. No, Chen admitted. But we needed you to help space remember what it was like when different things existed together naturally. When reality wasn't something to be enforced or manipulated, but simply experienced. Your civilizations, your technologies, they represent that stability, that certainty, and humanity. Ixalan asked, "What do you represent?" Maya smiled. "We represent the memory, the reminder that sometimes the way forward is to remember what came before, and that the best guardians aren't always the ones who fight the loudest, but the ones who remember the oldest truths." As if to emphasize her point, the sensors showed quantum space settling into new patterns, not rigid barriers or enforced physics, but a natural resilience born of remembering what it truly was. The deep dwellers and their Ancient One hadn't been defeated so much as reminded that they were trying to exist in a painting that had remembered it was supposed to be real. Humanity's role as silent guardians was over, but their role as teachers, helping both their allies and reality itself remember its own strength, was just beginning. In the depths of space, human ships resumed their patrols, not to enforce or protect, but to remember and to remind. Some walls don't need to be maintained. They just need to be remembered.